Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with my co host Thomas D. House for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. We have on a very special guest today. In Reagan Caucus circles, he really needs no introduction, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce him anyway. He's a best selling author, a longtime columnist and conservative commentator, and the co founder of The Dispatch, my absolute favorite source of news and commentary. I might have given some hints on that in the past. I'm talking, of course, about Jonah Goldberg. Jonah, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for all the kind words. I take compliments poorly, so like we can dispense with all future ones. Anyway, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. It's funny you mentioned that because first of all, I know how busy you are, so I appreciate you coming on. But I also know that you are not comfortable with people praising you. So I did want to praise you just a little bit, Jonah, just to try and rattle you before we get to some of these questions to kind of test you a little bit. So I was just going to mention. So you and I are pretty close to the same age, and a lot of conservative writers and thinkers from our generation idolize the late Charles Krauthammer, who I know was a friend of yours. One thing I've discovered since his passing is I've met a lot of like-minded conservatives, both online and at different political events and all that. Is that people that are 10 years younger than us, maybe even 15 years younger than us, to them you are their Charles Krauthammer. They look up to you, they admire you, the way we admired Charles. So, in case you're unaware of that, I don't know if you've been told that, but that is sort of the role that you have filled for a lot of these people.
I find it very depressing about the state of the world that I have replaced Charles Krauthammer. It's sort of like we've lost Superman, so let's get underdog. But I will say, look, I love Charles, and Charles could do things I could never ever possibly do. But I was told that back before the fall, I was told at Fox that they were hoping to make me into the next Charles Krauthammer, not as a matter of policy kind of thing, but like people would say, with Charles gone, we need this is a role for you, blah, blah. And I always took it as a just sort of a weirdly inappropriate compliment. But I'll put it this way. It's sort of like I don't like to write books. I like having written books. I don't like to be physically present when I'm receiving compliments, but hours or days from now, when I think back on this, I will find it very heartening that you said that. So thank you. And thanks to anybody foolish enough to believe
it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we did want to talk today about the state of the conservative political commentary world. You've actually been writing about this topic a bit lately, Jonah, and one of your pieces that really stood out to me was titled "The Boredom of Writing in the Trump Era." In it, you addressed a particular comment you often hear from people in regard to how ridiculous our politics have become. They say to you, and I've heard this too myself, but they say to you something along the lines of, "You must be loving this because you always have something to write about."
Mm-hmm.
For those who didn't read that piece you wrote, can you sort of talk about, how you respond to that point of view?
Yeah, I mean, I hear it all the time. I used to talk to Charlie Cook about this a bit from National Review, and he has the same view. The people assume who don't live and breathe normal people, right? They think that given all the drama and all the excitement and weirdness and sort of wacky late night Japanese game show vibes of American politics, that people who write about politics for a living just must love it because it's just it's there's so much going on. I'll hear from like relatives and this must be great for you and all that kind of thing, and it's like they think I'm a sports writer and it's the playoffs, and so it's just more exciting and all that kind of stuff. And the reality is, and I'm sure that's true for some political reporters and some political commentators, I hate this. I hate, I've made peace with a lot of it, but I hate losing friends over politics. I hate having people I once respected just straight up lie to me. I hate watching people I once had a lot more respect for have to sort of dance around obvious untruths and rationalize what, like, I mean, like, you can love Trump or hate Trump, but like I can't take you that seriously if you can't see why he bothers people, right? I mean, if you're going to gaslight me, and I know that phrase is overused, and pretend that he's not all that different and he's not really doing anything the other people, the other parties, the other politicians did, then either you're not very bright and can't see it, or you are brainwashed and can't see it, or you're lying. And I hate having to like argue with people who think it's the end of the world. Um, and when I say that, there are people on the left who think Trump means it's the end of the world, and there are people on the right who say, but for Trump, it would be the end of the world. I don't like apocalypticism. I don't like catastrophism. I don't like people saying we're one election away from the end of America. I don't like seeing the conservative movement, which I'm not even sure I can call it a conservative or a movement anymore, bastardized into sort of populist jingoism and weirdness. I don't like seeing institutions I once loved, or at least respected, populated by young people who think that simply because being an asshole is politically incorrect, it's therefore justified. I like arguments, and the fundamental thing is like, I can argue with someone who's wrong really easily, and sometimes they'll persuade me that they're more right than I thought, and that's fine. I can argue with anybody. I frankly enjoy arguing with Marxists, if they're sincere and they're honest, right? I enjoy arguing with all sorts of people who are wrong about things. That's not an issue. I cannot handle people who don't argue in good faith, who are pretextual, who start with the conclusion and then reason backwards, who pretend that the reason they support X is the stated reason rather than the obviously true reason. And it's just exhausting. And I'm not gonna go on, but it's a terrible time. And part of the boredom of it all is that regardless of so many of the things that Trump does, whether it's sending troops to Portland or Chicago or blah 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 blah, or indicting Comey or indicting Letitia James, or going after law firms, or going after political enemies, or shaking down universities, take your pick, right? The names change, the context changes, but basically it's the same friggin' 2 or 3 arguments over and over and over again. Trump was elected to do this. He has a mandate to do this. He's getting retribution, right? It's the same sort of people confusing excuses with explanations. Like, they'll tell me why Trump is doing something and they think that's an excuse for it, right? I mean, I can tell you why Hannibal Lecter eats people. That's not an excuse for eating people. Anyway, I can go on. But,
yeah. No, I think that's a very good summary. But yeah, it's something I totally relate to. So I was very drawn into that piece of yours. Thomas, I wanted to go ahead and bring him in for some questions. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, Jonah, I think what you guys do at the Dispatch is, a lot of us are really happy with the Dispatch because we think you guys have thread the needle on a sort of approach to, politics today, with Trump dominating the Republican Party and dominating all of politics and dominating our country like nobody's ever dominated a country before. Actually, one person, as far as America is concerned. We've talked about this before in the show, how he's gathered for himself more political power than any other figure in American history.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe George Washington, but George Washington couldn't get away with the stuff that Trump can't get away with.
I mean, I don't think you need to necessarily say more than anybody in American political. Like, Lincoln had a lot of power because
that's true.
He was a war hero, a war commander, right? And FDR had a lot of power because he had like 89 seats out of 98 in the Senate, and a supermajority in the House, and he was a 4-term president. What I think is true is that Trump has accrued more power over his own party.
That's right.
Than anybody, certainly in our lifetimes, and maybe even in American history. FDR lost lots of Democrats because he could afford to. This is different in that sense, is that, and also he controls the media apparatus of the right in a way that no other president has, certainly in our lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's more what I was getting at. Like, he doesn't have quite the sort of political capital, but he has that control over his party, is significant, even when he's not in office, and even like we saw in the last 4 years, right? That his ability to control them. So about that, so if you've talked about that, about how he has the more power, but in this sort of weird setting that we're in, you guys at the Dispatch have had a certain approach, and the approach has been to just call it like it is, right? Do you have any criticisms of the way other conservative opponents of Donald Trump have approached Donald Trump, that maybe it's backfired or hurt the conservative movement more than it's helped?
I mean, I not to question your motives, but it sounds like you're trying to get me to say something about the Bulwark.
No, no, I don't want to bash. I really don't want to bash the Bulwark, but
Yeah.
maybe if there's a way that we could learn from the last 9 years, like what's the best way to approach Trump? What do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I should be clear. Like, I mean, I appreciate the kind words of the Dispatch, and I tend to agree with them. I'm very proud of what we've done. And this week marks the 6th year since our launch. But when we were trying to launch, when we were raising money and planning this thing and putting it all together, we told people that we weren't going to be an anti-Trump thing. We wanted to be a post-Trump thing.
Mm-hmm.
We were putting it together. We were launching in the last year of his first term. We didn't think he was going to get elected again, right? Or at least I certainly didn't hope. I certainly hoped he wouldn't. And so that said, to the degree to which people want to describe me as anti-Trump or all that kind of stuff, I clearly have not been super successful, right? I mean, like, Trump got reelected. As we already discussed, he's consolidated power within the GOP and on the right in ways that we've never seen before. So, like, I don't think we're a model for how to oppose Trump, because that's certainly, we don't wake up every morning saying, how are we going to oppose Trump today? Which is, I think, something that they do kind of do at the Bulwark, and there's room for that in the world, and they're very successful at it. But it's not what we want to do. And so taking the Dispatch out of it, because we have different opinions about all of that as it is. I mean, Nick Catoggio, formerly Alla Pundit, there's a reason why one of the reasons why his profile pic is of Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, right? He has a different approach to this than I do. Kevin Williamson has a different approach that I do, and we're talking about the opinion people. And but so taking the Dispatch out of it and just talking about conservatives across the space, I think one of the nice things about the second term as opposed to the first term is everybody kind of knows who's who now, right? I remember very early on, it was one of the more influential pieces that I had written at that time, and was it spring of 2016? I wrote this piece comparing to what was happening on the right to the invasion of the body snatchers. Excellent. Where you'd have friends who would like go to sleep next to some sort of MAGA pod, and when they go to sleep, they're like, I can't believe this guy is doing as well as he is. And then when they wake up, they're like, Donald Trump is the greatest hero this country has ever produced. And it's like, dear God, no, you went to sleep, you turned into a pod person, right? There's an enormous amount of that crap. Anyone who's immune to becoming a pod person isn't going to become one now, right? Trump is a known entity, and I think that some of the people, there were people I thought at NR, at National Review, where I spent 20 years, and some of my dearest friends, are still there. There were people during the first term I thought were individually wrong in their attitude towards Trump, in their support of Trump. I think there are far fewer of those kinds of people in that at NR, and it doesn't mean I agree or disagree with any specific person these days at NR on a specific issue, but like, I think they've kept their heads and their intellectual honesty pretty well, and I'm kind of proud of them for it. And there are different institutional obligations at NR than there are at the Dispatch. They're a different thing. and so that requires different sort of approaches. But Andy McCarthy, I think, has been generally heroic. I mean, Ramesh and Charlie, they're great. I don't want to start naming all the names because then it sounds like I'm not naming other people, but you get the point. Elsewhere on the right, I think there are definitely some individuals who are great, but I think it's much easier to start generalizing about a lot of people who have just basically decided that to be a conservative or to be a right winger is just defend whatever Trump does. And there are certain outlets that are pretty obvious like that. Fox is a huge amount of that. And I want to say that like so many of the problems that we have today, Trump didn't create them. He made them worse. And part of my theory of where the right, where the conservative, broadly speaking, let's just call them conservative intellectuals, by which I mean everybody from like actual historians and scholars to, pundits and columnists and the rest. They spent so long fighting an insurgent battle to take over the GOP, to control the GOP. The conservative movement took over the GOP, certainly by Reagan, or by the end of Reagan, got to remember William F. Buckley had an antagonistic view towards the GOP. There was real intellectual tension between the conservatives of the 40s, 50s, and early 60s and the Republican Party. And, Richard Nixon once said that the Buckleyites were the most dangerous people in the conservative movement, far more dangerous than the Birchers. And to the point where they got very cozy. And now an enormous number of people on the right, some of whom are very dear friends, and I've had this conversation with them, who I love and respect, but they basically think at some fundamental level that their job is to be de facto political consultants for the Republican Party. And they may lament the direction that the GOP is taking, but they're still working from the assumption that it's always better if the GOP wins. They're still working from the assumption that they're still buying at least some of that catastrophism and apocalypticism that if the Democrats win, it will all be over, rather than thinking, hey, you know what might be good for the GOP is to lose a couple of elections to get the yahoos out of it, right? That kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And you can see it in George Will, who's still a hero to me. He wrote columns in 2020 about how the goal of every true conservative should be to see to it that the Republican Party loses in a bunch of places. He wasn't saying that because he loved DEI and transgender surgeries. He was saying that because he thought that conservatives had lost control of the Republican Party to populist, nationalist right-wingers. And you can still hear it in a lot of conservative, commentary, where every now and then they'll just say things, casually like, oh, I think if turnout is good, we have a really good shot of winning on election day. Well, who's the we? Like, the conservative movement is supposed to have some critical distance here, and not just sort of be synonymous with Republican. And I think that's sort of the problem, is that people just see them as almost synonyms, and that leads to a lot of analytical and philosophical error.
Mm-hmm. Hey, John?
Yeah, I was going to ask, just to sort of coming off that a little bit. It seemed, I think it was pretty obvious to a lot of people at the very beginning of the Trump era that all of these media conservatives who, they surrendered their long preached principles for this ride on the Trump train, and they did so out of professional survival. They saw their audience change before their very eyes, so they adopted accordingly. I think some of these people have been, totally disingenuous since then, while others over time may have possibly come to believe their own BS on it. It's always hard to tell who falls into what category. But to me, the common thread has always been money, and professional viability. But you've been effectively arguing, Jonah, lately that I think it was both on Twitter and in a recent piece for the Dispatch, that at least at this point in the game, money trails far behind this never-ending thirst for audience capture. And the evidence you presented is that many of the worst offenders are incredibly wealthy, you know,
Mhm.
and they just keep going and sinking to new levels. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah. So like, I I think money is always worth suspecting as a motivation because it so often is. But for a lot of people, what they really want is relevance, right? They really want to be talked about. They want, fame, glory. We can use all sorts of different words for it, right? They want to be recognized at airports. I think if you were going to talk about the damage that is done to people's souls, being recognized and asking people to pose in selfies at airports might be greater than the effects of money. It is weird to me how much people love it, and I say this as someone. I mean, look, it's flattering. It's happened to me. It doesn't happen to me very much anymore, but like back when I was a Fox News All Star, it happened to me all the time, and I'm always gracious about it. I'm a nice guy, right? And it makes me a little uncomfortable because of the compliment thing, but like at the same time, you feel like you're doing someone a mitzvah, by being nice and posing for a picture and being a mensch about it. But there are people like I think Sean Hannity, who I think he would dry up like a piece of dog dropping and blow away if he wasn't on TV for 6 months. Like there's some people who just need it. They need it deep in their bones. They want to be players and be relevant, be in the room where it's happening, as it were, right? And I think this is one of the things that we saw with a lot. One of the when Steve and I launched the Dispatch, we didn't think it should fall to us. We, like a lot of people, we always think we're younger than we actually are. Um, and, and we thought that like the guys who were 10, 15, 20 years older than us were the ones who we consider to be our role models, to be our mentors, the people who had defined conservatism for us. We kind of assumed, okay, this is their chance to show that they really believe this stuff. And some did. Charles did. George Will did. Bill Bennett didn't. A bunch of people didn't. And Rudy Giuliani didn't, right? And he was never like a real movement conservative guy, but I thought he was an honorable guy for most of my life. And there were a bunch of people, Newt Gingrich is a good example of this, who saw this as like their last chance to be relevant in the game, right? Their last chance to go to the rodeo. And so they were among the earliest sort of Trump train joiners rather than opponents. And you can go down a long list of people who went this way for various reasons. Some of it was pure partisanship. They were just sort of team people. And Hugh Hewitt, to his credit, we had a conversation about this on air, and I was like, look, at the end of the day, you're more of a party guy than I am. And he says, you're right, I'm more of a party guy. And one of the things I've used this analogy a million times, and I'll get to the money thing and fame thing in a second, but in 2015, 2016, I'd spent most of my life wearing a bunch of different hats, right? In political science, they talk about the different hats the president wears: commander in chief, head of state, head of government, this, that, all these different hats. As a conservative, quote unquote, intellectual, I had my intellectual hat, I had my author hat, I had my think tanker hat, I had my funny public speaker hat where I would go and, do shtick and dole out, red meat like it was an abattoir for, college groups and that kind of stuff. And I would have my more serious, refined hat. I would have my columnist hat. I'd have all these different hats, right? And I'd have my party hat because I was a Republican. I was never had much affiliation with the Republican Party, but I rooted for them because they were this more conservative of the two parties. And what Trump did is required everybody to take off every hat but one. And what hat you decided to keep on was going to be the thing you leaned into. And a bunch of people put on the party hat. They were like, at the end of the day, he's the Republican nominee. I got to support him. And I don't like it, but I can respect it. The problem is, and this gets to your part of your question, as my friend Yuval Levin likes to say, cynicism is very hard to maintain. So you can be you can say, well, he's the lesser of two evils. I'm voting against Hillary. I'm not really voting for him. I'm going to hold my nose and vote for this guy. And you can say, I wish he wouldn't tweet this stuff and blah, 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 but he's better than the alternative and all these kinds of things. And we are not wired for that to be sustainable. We are wired for us to say, the head of our tribe is a really scummy dude, and he's embarrassing, but he's ours, so we're going to stick with him, right? We're just not wired to do that very much. And so over time, we convince ourselves that our leader, and I'm using all these terms with air quotes and advisedly, because I'm just not part of the Republican tribe the way I once was. But there were a whole bunch of people who convinced themselves that what were shortcomings were actually now features, right? There's that goober Tom Klingenstein or something. He's the chair of the Claremont Institute, and a guy who looks like he's trying to compensate for all the wedgies he got in high school. I cannot think of a better candidate. And he has these very ponderous videos that he has produced for him, and he writes these very ponderous essays where he thinks he's being dispositive, and then he has to buy ads on Twitter to get people to see them because no one knows who he is or gives a rat's ass about him, except he writes checks for a lot of people. He gave this big speech, maybe at the Claremont Institute, I'm not sure, saying, I often talk to people who say, I like the things that Trump is doing, but I don't like parts of his character or his personality. And I always ask, what parts? And then he goes on ponderously to say, it's those parts that you must embrace the most, right? The nasty, bullying, anti-intellectual, crappy parts of Trump, he thinks are features, not bugs. And I think that has become a thing for a lot of people. As like, I'm one of these people, I had quite a ride with the whole Clinton stuff. And I was one of those people who actually believed what I was saying about how character matters. I was one of those people who believed that Bill Bennett believed that character matters. I agreed with those books about character. I think character matters a lot. And we can argue about who had worse character, Bill Clinton or Donald Trump. I don't think it really matters. Both had bad characters. And the evidence that Trump's character is very bad is very obvious. And what has happened is people have decided to, instead of holding up an objective moral yardstick and measuring Trump by it, they decided to bend and twist and shave and cut the moral yardstick to fit Trump's character, and then say this is the definition of good character. I mean, Glenn Beck, who I used to be good friends with, who used to talk all the time about Bill Clinton's character. He was talking about how Trump is, the last alpha dog. He's like James Bond. All the women love him. All this. It's like, I find that crap embarrassing. Anyway, so I think that's part of it, is that we've just decided to like bend to the mold of Donald Trump rather than hold him accountable to a standard. But more broadly, I think, Tucker Carlson has a lot of money, right? Megyn Kelly has a lot of money. They are going for things other than money here. They may want the money that comes with it because they see that as a sort of a die marker of their prestige, right? It's a sort of proof of their value, but they're looking for status more than they are looking for more than cashing out. And I think that's true of an enormous number of people who, Sean Hannity. I remember in 2016, Sean, I always got along with, but he was attacking me and you snooty National Review guys who go on your cruises, why don't you go on another cruise, Jonah, kind of thing, as if like I am drinking out of champagne out of slippers or something. Meanwhile, the guy hasn't flown commercial in like 30 years. And he's pretending that like I'm the sellout who like had to, take out a loan to pay my tax. It's so ridiculous. What they want is they want to be players. They want to have status. They want to have, thumos or whatever the Greeks call it. And so the money thing can illuminate that, but I don't. I think greed is not the only one of the seven deadly sins, right? Pride is another one, and I think that the biblical understanding of pride has more to do with it than just pure greed.
Mhm.
As Kevin Williamson likes to say, what's the point of having FU money if you're not willing to say FU? And it turns out that an enormous number of people are not willing to say FU because they don't want to lose their relevance. And like a very prominent person in that space, I was DMing with them because they had said something nasty about the Dispatch, and that person exploded on me in a DM, which I just think it's bad form to reveal private stuff, but like, oh, you're just bitter because you're not relevant anymore, and I'm super relevant and all this kind of stuff. And it was a perfect illustration for me, or illumination, of someone telling on themselves that they assumed the thing I care about is the same thing they care about. My podcast is called The Remnant for a reason. I am perfectly. If I had FU money, occasionally I would write a G file from a hammock somewhere. I'm a different. I'm wired differently. I think I've learned that now. And There're just an enormous number of people who can't handle the idea of not being with a team, and I think that's a big part of it. I'm sorry I'm rambling. I told you guys before I'm super overtired, so I just tend to just. It's like riding a bike. If I stop talking, I feel like I'll fall over. So.
No, this is great. You brought up your podcast, The Remnant. It's a great listen. I always listen to it. You recently had on Jay Nordlinger as a guest, and the two of you got into an area, if I understand you correctly, that falls in line with something I've been thinking about a lot. Like you, I believe that rhetoric matters, political rhetoric, and I've been calling out reckless rhetoric from both sides, as you have as well, for a long time. With that in mind, when I think about January 6th, it seems to me that the best good faith defense of those who invaded the Capitol that day, though it's not really a defense, but it's that they honestly believed, because of the lies Trump had been telling them for 2 months, that our system of democracy had been hijacked, and that what they were doing was, in their minds, their patriotic duty to try and take it back. And the result, of course, was this terrible political violence. Now we're in a situation where, even if you set aside Trump's, his executive overreach, the examples we've seen, policy stuff, the rhetoric he's openly throwing out there is so hostile, to the Constitution and our American rights, and so autocratic in nature, that even if it, I think you described it as, largely amounting to bombast and trolling, and may not be representative of what he's actually doing in practice. I worry that, as with January 6th, it could inspire political violence from people who are taking him at his word and may think that they need to fight for their country. I think that's basically the point you were trying to make. Let me know if I got that wrong.
Yeah, no, I think that's part of it, to be sure. I also think it's worth keeping. I mean, so like, take the stuff about sending the National Guard to cities, right? The legal arguments and the rhetorical arguments are very different. In some ways, sort of like the January 6th stuff, right? I mean, the legal arguments that legal dream team were making in front of judges were very humble, small, and had no chance of like any success in terms of reversing the election. The stuff they would say at Four Seasons Landscaping, or on Fox News, or on those Potemkin weird ass fake hearings that they would do, they talked about compelling evidence about how the election was stolen, which is another way of saying they were lying their asses off, right? But so on the delta between what the rhetoric coming out of the White House and coming out of Steve Miller and that crowd is very different than what they're actually claiming in courts, or what they're not even going to courts to do. Like, so the example I want to get to is Trump keeps talking about insurrection, right? Steve Miller keeps using the word insurrection. And I think some of that is trolling because they didn't like that their people were called insurrectionists. So now they're just trying to like take the stigma out of the word or throw it at the Democrats and that kind of stuff. But part of it is, I think, and this is part of the problem with Trump's rhetoric, is this normalization thing where he will just keep repeating the technical word for it from social science is bullshit. He'll keep repeating these things that to get people to sort of stop thinking the term is radioactive, to stop thinking they should pay attention, right? To just normalize it. But he hasn't actually invoked the Insurrection Act, which would give him the power to do all of these things that, and he's come short of violating the law with the troop stuff. I mean, that's one reason he hasn't sent them to Chicago yet, precisely because, the law is not with him yet. He's waiting for, I think in some ways he's trying to goad people into the kind of violence that would justify sending the National Guard. But my point is like, I think that I think there's a real non-trivial chance that he will incite people to violence on his side or against him, right? I mean, like, he is inciting violence to a certain extent, and I don't mean in a legal sense. I just mean that the stuff he's doing with ICE has already incited people criminally. I'm not justifying it. I am not saying it's good or right or anything like that. I'm not saying that necessarily Trump shouldn't deploy ICE for fear of crazy people shooting at ICE, but crazy people are shooting at ICE in part because of the way Trump talks about what he's going to do with ICE. He's talking about, these immigrants poisoning the blood. And the danger you're talking about is right-wingers believing him. But there's another danger, which is that left-wingers will believe he's going to go full Hitler because of the way he's comporting himself, and decide to put meat behind the term resistance. And that when that happens, you then have the right say, oh my gosh, he's right about these people that came for Charlie Kirk. They tried to kill Trump. We have to get them before they get us. All the sort of Kurt Schlichter kind of nonsense talk. And so you get this logic of preemption from both sides. This sort of, the Hutsis are getting ready to kill all the Tutsi, or the Hutus are getting ready to kill all the Tutsis, so we have to get them first kind of logic. That is being spread all over the place. That's one danger. And then there's just the other danger that by the time Trump actually sends troops into a city for reals, will we say, well, hasn't he been doing that all along? Didn't he do that in DC? Didn't he do that in LA? Didn't he do that in Portland? So why is this any different? You guys say it's always bad every time, so why is it, so much worse this time? That's part of what he did with the 2020 election, right? Is he kept saying over and over again, if they don't try to steal the election, they're going to try and steal the election. He claimed that the Iowa caucuses in 2016 were stolen, right? He says this stuff over and over and over and over again, so that when he needs to say it, he can say, look, I've been warning you all along that they were going to steal the election, right? I think he's trying to do the same thing with this idea of using force. I think part of his thinking might be that, hey, maybe I should be sending the National Guard to certain cities to make sure we have fair midterm elections, right? I'm not saying he's going to do that, but I think he likes to keep his options open. And I think he is trying to normalize the idea that the National Guard is in effect his private army. And I think he's being pretty effective at it. And so that's part of the problem with the rhetoric too. And at some point, what's his face? Fred Thompson is going to come up to the top of his aircraft carrier and say, this is going to get out of hand and people are going to die, right? I mean, it's that kind of vibe. People are misreading each other. The rhetoric after Charlie Kirk was killed was grotesque. Not as grotesque as actually murdering Charlie Kirk, because murder is really, really bad. But I don't think we're destined for a civil war, but I find it more and more difficult to think that we're not going to have a lot more political violence before we have less.
Yeah. Thomas, do you want to, you have a question?
Well, just, I guess, on a positive note, maybe, I don't know.
There was a great play, Mrs. Lincoln.
Yeah. there's some signs. Obviously, we're talking about all this chaos that's going on at the domestic level, but there are some signs of some improvement by the Trump administration on foreign policy level. He's been much more supportive of Ukraine winning the war. Every time he tries to do anything, somebody in the Pentagon stops it. But still, at least rhetorically, he's way more supportive of Ukraine winning the war. But now they have this peace deal between Hamas and Israel. What are your thoughts on this? Are you optimistic? Is it going to be as good as it looks on paper, or what do you think?
Okay, so let's put it. We're recording this on October 10th.
Yeah.
Friday, October.
Right. So allegedly, so apparently it's gone in the first phase, quote unquote phase, has gone into effect. The IDF has pulled back to a certain line and is not dropping bombs or anything. So now Hamas has like 72 hours to start releasing hostages.
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that by Tuesday, 20 living hostages have been released. I think people are not prepared for what rough shape these people are going to be in. I heard Rubio saying we're going to see 20, heroic souls or whatever. And I'm not trying to make fun of Rubio here, but I don't think we're going to see most of them. I think Israel authorities are going to hide them from cameras and leave it up to families to decide who gets to physically see these people, because I think they're going to be walking skeletons, a lot of them, and it's going to be heartbreaking. But put that aside, we get 20 hostages out of it. And then things fall apart after that. That is still a huge win, and Donald Trump deserves a lot of credit for it. Just getting the last living hostages out I don't want to make it sound like, oh, it's better than nothing. It's a big deal. Mm-hmm. But for Trump, it wouldn't have happened. And so he deserves credit for that. It is entirely possible that we go further along with the different phases. It's interesting. My understanding is that the Trump proposal originally, the plan, wasn't about phases. Like, it was supposed to all just happen at once, even though there was a lot of missing components to it, like who these Palestinian technocrats were going to be and who are going to run Gaza and all that. And it was basically the negotiators in Qatar or I guess in Sharm el Sheikh or whatever, for Hamas and for Israel and for the other various stakeholders, who said, let's cut this up into phases, because it doesn't work trying to do it all at once. And so the thing wasn't even structured to be done in phases. It was sort of like iterated in 2 phases, which is fine and smart, because that got us this far. I want to be really clear. I think it is wildly unlikely that we get to phase 20 without this thing going off the rails. And it has nothing to do with Trump. It's not a criticism of Trump. He will have been successful to a significant degree if it comes far short of the 20th phase or whatever or 20th step. If it falls apart in 3 weeks, the mere fact that the Saudis and the Turks and all these people had buy-in, that Trump got Bibi to go along with it, these are all things that he deserves praise and credit for. And I was just talking about this on my own podcast. Like, I think part of it is there's a reason why Trump's foreign policy successes, such as they've been, have almost all been in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And I think part of it is just because that is the part of the world that thinks most like Donald Trump. It's very transactional. It's about power. It's about saving face. It's about prestige and status and lots of bribery behind the scenes and all that kind of stuff. Trump gets it, and they get Trump. Like, Middle East is mostly a strongman culture, and that's how Trump likes to be perceived. And so I don't think it's a coincidence, right? And that's fine, right? For dealing with the Middle East. We should also say, just to be really clear, none of this is possible without Israel's military success, right? And again, that's also not taking anything away from Trump. You can say that Truman and Dean Acheson and all those guys were the most brilliant statesmen on earth for creating NATO and the UN. You can't create NATO and the UN and get them up and running unless you win World War II first, right? Military success yields diplomatic opportunity. But kudos to Trump for seizing on it. Beyond that, I don't know what necessarily to make of it, because I think the process is going to get much uglier going forward, right? They're going to release a bunch of Palestinian prisoners, including possibly Marwan Barghouti, which I could see maybe destroying Bibi's coalition, right? I mean, like, there's a lot of unpredictable stuff going forward, but Trump deserves the credit that he gets. He was hands-on this. Presidents, as a rule, get credit for the foreign policy accomplishments on their watch, whether they deserve them or not. I think he deserves praise for this more than for a lot of positive things. I am much more skeptical of your guarded optimism about Ukraine. You're right, absolutely, that he has said better things about Ukraine, but talk about an area where it's the show rather than the tell that matters.
Yeah.
And until we're sending gobs of weapons and other support to Ukraine to back up that rhetoric, I'm less, assured by it. I mean, it's better than not having the rhetoric, but that's an area where with Ukraine, the rhetoric is better than nothing, but it's not a lot better than nothing.
It does seem every time he says he's going to do something for Ukraine, somebody at the Pentagon says, no, we're not going to do that. And then it's over.
Yeah. Well, that Colby guy does it, right? I mean, it's funny when you think about it. Who's the deep state now? The way we use that phrase is MAGA, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's the sort of the Vance Nicks and the isolationists who are deep in the bowels of the Pentagon and these other places who are undermining Trump. It's not the cookie-pushing left-wing transnational progressives anymore. It's the sort of mouth-breathing MAGA types. And one of these days, Trump's really going to realize it and be really pissed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I wonder, you have to wonder, because the hope is that with a lot of these foreign policy issues that Marco Rubio knows what he's doing and he knows what he's talking about, and he's probably a positive influence for Trump.
Probably.
But he has to compete in that administration with people like Vance and at the Pentagon with Elbridge Colby. So
yeah, I mean, I think Rubio's just kicking ass at the National Archives. I mean, he is doing a great job there. But no, you're right. I mean, look, one of the reasons why the first term was so much, in retrospect, so much better and so much more normal was because there were a lot of people keeping Trump from his worst instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And now, like, to the extent anyone plays that role, it's Rubio and Bessent. And you would not have, but they are not circuit breakers the way Mattis was or Pence was. Just think about the difference between Pence and Vance, and it explains a big chunk of the difference. It illustrates a big chunk of the difference between the first term and the second term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. John?
Yeah, well, with Jonah, we try not to keep our guests any longer than 45 minutes, and you've been very generous with your time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. I've been fortunate enough to meet you a couple times in the past, and it's always great talking to you.
You were one of my favorite cellmates. I just want to be clear.
Excellent.
You're great.
It's great that we could keep in touch after we got out. So it's fantastic.
And your toilet wine is legendary across the Eastern Seaboard. I just want to say so. No, but I'm glad to come on. If I can be of more service, I would be happy to. And you guys, you're what I mean by the remnant. I don't know that we agree on everything. I don't really give a rat's ass whether we agree on everything, but you think the right things. You think the right things that should matter do matter, and there just aren't that many people I think there are a lot of normal Americans who don't like this crap, who are on the left or the right, or Democrat or Republican, but there's just not a lot of people left in sort of our line of work who are willing to say it's just not supposed to be this way. And so I want to congratulate you guys and thank you again for all the kind words, which I'll process later.
Well, we appreciate that. Thank you, Joe. That means a lot to us. I know it means a lot to people that are affiliated with the Reagan Caucus family. So yeah, that means a lot. We appreciate it. Anything else you'd like to add, Thomas?
Oh no, that's good. That's okay. But just thanks so much, Jonah. Thanks for coming on, and maybe you'll come on again sometime.
Absolutely, sure, no problem.
Thank you.
Excellent. And to everybody watching today, we want to thank you all for tuning in. If you watched today's episode on YouTube, as always, make sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. And we will see you next time on the Reagan Caucus Podcast.